And our future focus this week is on traveling within a city. Award-winning futurist, researcher, and keynote speaker Nikolas Badminton joins us on Canada Now. And Nick, let's talk public transit first off. On the show earlier this week, we had discussed how the BC Ministry of Health says there have been no known cases of COVID-19 spread on public transit, but still people continue to be hesitant to take it.
Yeah, there's been no cases because no one's riding. I mean, or very, very few people are riding. As I sort of travel around Toronto and see what's happening there and chatting to people in other cities around Canada, very few people are jumping on buses or streetcars or anything like that. They're deciding to hop on their bikes or to walk places or to even jump in their cars as well. So I'm not surprised. And in Toronto, they've just announced that you won't be able to ride the TTC without a mask. I think that's super sensible for the time being as we sort of come out the back end of this pandemic. So, I do think that once it's deemed safe, I think that people are going to flock back as soon as those winter months hit. We're just going to have to take more precautions and be careful. But not everyone has got a car. Not everyone's going to jump on a bike in terrible weather days, right?
Yeah, or have the ability one way or another. And with public transit, could we see public transit become obsolete at some point or take on such a massive hit?
No, I actually think the public transport is going to become more popular. I truly believe that over time that fewer people are going to jump in their own vehicles and they're going to lean into public transport, very much like you see in many parts of Europe. And obviously I've traveled extensively across Europe and public transport is a main backbone of how people get from A to B there.
And earlier on this week, we were also addressing the idea of, in trying to get those to take public transit more. Like, what if they knew they weren't going to be on the bus for very long? Alternating stops, maybe that's more for subways, but might we see dedicated bus lanes? And if so, would it be at the cost of parking lanes?
Well, if we have fewer people driving their own cars, then parking is going to be reduced greatly. Something like 30, 40 billion square feet of parking in North America. So that's a lot of space that can be liberated for better use. I personally feel. What's interesting is we're seeing dedicated bike lanes popping up, even though they're quite temporary for the time being. We're seeing things like bus lanes coming into a lot of different cities across North America. I think that this comes back to the conversation about designing the cities that are practical for everyone to use, and that equitable use and ownership of getting from A to B is what's needed now versus sort of all of the streets being designed for, industrial vehicles or personal vehicles. It's time to give it back to the people a little bit.
Okay, let's talk more about cycling, because many Canadians have turned to cycling. Municipal governments, Nick, across Canada are moving quickly to create clearly marked bicycle lanes in order for people to travel safely through cities. A number of city councils have approved road closures, either partial or complete, as an emergency alternative to public transit. But many of the biggest cities in the world have done this. Might this become more permanent?
I certainly hope so. So I've just bought a second bike because you always need another bike, right? I was riding a single speed. I wanted to do longer rides. In and around Toronto, I've got friends that do that as well. And what's interesting right now is sales of adult leisure bikes have gone through the roof. I tried 4 times to buy my bike. Eventually, I landed on something that worked really well. I worked with a local shop. They were awesome, but it was a painful process. And literally, they've sold out of everything under $1,200. Bike sales have gone through the roof, and the growth in these shops is between 30% and 300% across North America. You literally cannot buy a bicycle today if you didn't already have one. So we're going to have a lot of people that are certainly going to be out and about this summer across all the provinces in Canada cycling. And that is heartening to me. That I'm really excited that people are stepping in. I would like to think that this becomes a habit over time and that biking becomes a more central part of how we do get from A to B.
Okay, let's push it to the extreme here. Early in March, Infrastructure Minister Catherine McKenna appointed Halifax MP Andy Fillmore to head up a new national active transportation strategy. He said although many of the strategy's goals are long-term, the government is also looking to amend and update its 12-year, $180 billion infrastructure plan to acknowledge the realities of COVID-19, and that will include a greater focus on cycling. So to get to the extreme, cities like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, they've been known to be cycling cities. Might we see more of those in North America?
You know, I've spent time in both Copenhagen and Amsterdam, and it's awesome. And the culture there and the priority given to bicycles, protected bike lanes, and the such like, it just changes, you know, the health profile of the city, the dynamic of the streets. And I think that that's great. I would love to see that happen in Canada. I think that very much it's a North American thing. You know, buy a car, hit the streets. That's how you get from A to B. People drive 4 kilometers to work, you know, from where they are, you know, and, you know, just outside of a city, you know, into the city. I once met someone when I was living in Vancouver that had never taken a bus from where they lived in Kitsilano to downtown Vancouver. They drove 2 kilometers to work every day. And this is a mindset that's going to change. And I think that, you know, being out there, being healthy, hitting the streets, if we can make that happen in Canada across the cities and you know, in rural destinations as well, then that's a really exciting opportunity for me.
Well, insurance would have to be adjusted. And many people just have life insurance to cover themselves. And if they are cycling every day, they're going to need better coverage. I wonder if the insurance biz is going to begin to shift.
Well, the insurance business was already starting to shift, and we're starting to, you know, these premiums that you have to pay for insuring cars and whatever are just getting a little bit out of control these days. I mean, as a business, you pay money into something and you may never use the cash that you put in. Now, there are actually players out there that are starting to really redress that balance. There's a property insurance business down in New York City, and it's going across North America, called Lemonade. You pay into the insurance, and the company Lemonade takes their cut of that. At the end of the year, if you haven't spent it and used any of that because you've had nothing stolen, nothing's been broken in your place, it needs to be fixed, you've got access to that money to be able to donate that to not-for-profits and to charities. And this is the kind of thinking that's going to completely disrupt and change the insurance market. I talk about this to everyone, and you should see the look of fear in the eye of the insurance companies when I do so.
I can imagine, because that all sounds pretty good on this end. All right, so car use. Is it going to decrease? Is there going to be a dramatic dip in car use?
Well, car sales have actually gone through the floor, to be honest, Jeff. If you actually think, you know, car sales fell 75% in April, 48% in March, 44% in May. It's just, you know, it's a tough time out there if you're a car salesman, especially for new vehicles. I think that over time, as we have autonomous vehicles and improved public transportation, I don't think younger people are going to care about owning a vehicle. Right. You know, I drive an electric vehicle. I would hope that people that do choose to buy cars do buy electric vehicles, and things are more sustainable, you know, even hybrids. So it's going to be really interesting. I've done a bunch of different interviews recently around what people are going to do with cars. And it's just too early to tell. But one thing is very, very sure. The used car market is growing. The new car market is shrinking, and that's starting to shift towards electric vehicles. So, you know, we're going to see a lot of disruption in the automotive space.
Okay, let's start talking self-driving cars, because we may have been banking on one day having self-driving cars that don't crash into each other. A study was recently released by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety and looked at more than 5,000 police-reported crashes from the National Motor Vehicle Crash Causation Survey. And while autonomous technologies would prevent a ton of crashes, it won't be all of them, at least as technology stands right now.
Right, absolutely. So I think the numbers are around about 1.3 million people a year die from human-caused accidents in cars, in vehicles. So that's a huge amount of people. If you were to even take, you know, 10% of that's 130,000 people that didn't die. Now, you know, the promise of autonomous vehicles is they would not crash. They would not have that problem. People talk about the trolley problem. Which route do they take? Do they kill the woman with the baby? Do they kill the crew that's fixing the road? Well, autonomous vehicles look ahead and now actually stop, and there's still a lot of problems with that. And we've seen problems with Teslas and Ubers and other experiments, and people have unfortunately lost their lives. But going forward, this is going to fundamentally change how many people do die on the streets. And the insurance industry, who are the people that funded this study, is saying, well, it's not going to fix everything. You still want to go out there and drive your cars. It kind of feels like a self-serving kind of survey. Let's look to more independent surveys for this information, right? The promise is big. We're still a long way from autonomous vehicles being everywhere in the world. And but, next 10 years is very, very exciting times, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, things like drunk driving, fatigue, human error, speeding, distracted driving, those would be taken care of. But if designers are to achieve perfection, they would need to prioritize safety over rider preferences. Do you get the sense that that's happening as we speak?
Well, this is what has to be built into the systems. I mean, it's not about, I often stand up at conferences and say, who loves to drive? And you'll get actually a third of the audience putting their hands up, Alberta and Manitoba and whatever, slightly more people, because it's more rural, car culture is deeply ingrained. And I sort of challenge it and say, no one really loves to drive. We've just been told that. But when people start to have these vehicles and they will drive us from A to B, especially on longer routes, I think that it's going to completely change the game. I once drove for eight hours across Idaho. And I honestly would have preferred to have had a self-driving car do that journey than me locked to the wheel, looking straight ahead and pointing in a straight line for that amount of time. It was a pretty painful experience. So, let's put what humans want at the center of this. Unfortunately, car culture, people want to jump in a car, drive as fast as they can, be a bit reckless, add some excitement to their day. All of that's going to disappear. And do you know what? That's not a bad thing.
It's not. When it comes to safety, absolutely. I often think about self-driving cars when I make the drive from Toronto to Montreal, which I usually do about once a year, maybe every other year. Obviously, that's not happening this year, and it was planned, but that's not happening this year. But that drive on the 401 from Toronto to Montreal, oh my goodness. Like I constantly think about self-driving cars, and then thinking, one day I think I'm going to be on this road in a self-driving car. I think that's going to happen one day. Check out NikolasBadminton.com. Futurist researcher, keynote speaker Nikolas Badminton. Always a pleasure, my friend. Great to hear from you. We'll talk again next week.
Speak to you very soon, Jeff. Take care.